My son was suffering terribly and required my kidney. My daughter-in-law stated, "It is your obligation. You are his mother." The physician was preparing me for surgery when, without warning, my 9-year-old grandson burst into the room, exclaiming, "Grandma, I will reveal the genuine reason my father requires your kidney." The entire medical staff stood still. I'm grateful you've arrived. If you're viewing this recording, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments, tell me from where you are listening to my tale of retribution. I wish to ascertain the extent of its reach. I'm positioned on the chilly metal of the operating table. The brilliant surgical lamp overhead is blinding my sight. It's so intense, I yearn to shut my eyes with all my strength, yet I cannot. My entire being is rigid, and it's not due to the chill. It's from a suffocating sensation, as though destiny itself is constricting my throat. The consistent, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor serves as a constant pulse. However, each pulse feels like a mallet striking my skull. I can discern every sound within the chamber with perfect clarity. The metallic clinking of instruments as the nurse arranges them. The rustling of paper as Dr. Evans reviews my chart, and even the faint murmurs from the other side of the glass partition, where my daughter-in-law, Rebecca, is with her parents. I attempt to direct my gaze towards the opaque glass. There's Rebecca, her arms folded across her chest, her stare as piercing as a sharp blade. She's conferring with her parents, yet her eyes remain fixed on me. It's as if she's issuing a directive. Sign it now. Proceed. Do not hesitate. I have already affixed my signature to the consent form for donating my kidney to my son, Adam. That document must now reside somewhere on the doctor's desk, bearing my shaky inscription and my irrevocable pledge. The nurse holds the syringe, its anesthetic gleaming under the light. I close my eyes. I attempt to inhale deeply, but my chest feels impossibly heavy. I contemplate Adam, my eldest son, whom I raised with immense effort and sacrificed my entire existence to safeguard. He lies in the adjoining room, frail, awaiting my kidney to sustain his life. I reassure myself, this is the righteous course of action. As a mother, it is my duty. But why do I perceive this profound void within my spirit? This inexplicable apprehension? Abruptly, a deafening clamor startles me. The operating room door is flung open, and a surge of frigid air rushes in, causing the instrument tray on the table to tremble and rattle. The entire room seems to pause in anticipation. I open my eyes, attempting to elevate my head, despite the restraints holding me fast. My 9-year-old grandson, Mario, sprints in like a miniature tempest. His athletic footwear is caked with mud. His school attire is creased, and his small chest heaves as he struggles for breath. Behind him, a distressed nurse pursues him, shouting, "Child, you cannot enter here! Good heavens, stop!" But Mario does not halt. He races directly towards me, his wide, round eyes conveying fear, yet also unwavering resolve. "Grandma," he utters, his voice quivering, so distinct it pierces my heart. "I must inform everyone why my father truly requires your kidney." A hush falls over the entire space. The monitor's beeping now escalates, as if seeking to rupture the very fabric of the room. A nearby physician drops a pair of surgical tweezers. The sound of metal impacting the marble floor is deafening, a sharp rupture in the prevailing tension. I gaze at Mario, my little grandson, whom I still cradle and read bedtime stories to. There he stands, clutching an aged mobile phone, his countenance pale but his eyes alight. What knowledge does he possess? Why is he uttering these words? My heart is pounding erratically as if intent on leaping from my chest. I wish to cry out and question him then and there, but my throat is so parched I am incapable of uttering a single syllable. Dr. Evans, the lead surgeon, furrows his brow. He raises a hand, signaling the entire team to cease their actions. His voice is deep yet sharp. Whatever you need to say, state it now. I observe his gaze sweep over me and then settle on Mario, as if he too is ensnared in this peculiar moment across the glass. Rebecca pounds on the door, causing the glass to vibrate. "Do not heed him," she shrieks, her voice strained and nearly hysterical. "He is merely a child, you will see." But Rebecca's expression is no longer icy. It trembles with sheer panic, as though a secret is on the verge of revelation. Mario does not acknowledge his mother. He solely focuses on me, gripping the cell phone in his small hand with such force that his knuckles turn white. He inhales deeply, as if summoning all the courage in his existence. I long to sit up, to embrace him, to tell him not to be frightened. But I remain immobilized. I can only observe. And within my grandson's innocent eyes, I perceive a profound sorrow, a truth he is endeavoring to illuminate. In that precise instant, as the entire room holds its breath, recollections of the past surge through my mind like an avalanche, of those days when I believed my family was an unassailable unit, replete with affection and trust. I recall my former abode in Chicago, where the aroma of disinfectant permeated every nook, a scent so familiar that I had ceased to notice it. I am 67 years of age, yet at times I feel considerably older, as if time had long ago pilfered my vigor. My husband, Joe, has been confined to his bed for over a decade. He sits in his aged wheelchair, its wheels emitting a persistent squeak each time I propel him into the garden for a breath of fresh air. He rarely speaks. Only occasionally does he emit a sigh, his gaze lost in the void. On one occasion I clasped his hand and inquired, "Joe, are you weary of this existence?" He merely blinked, offering no response. I am uncertain if he comprehended me or if I was merely conversing with myself. That residence was my entire universe, the sanctuary where I nurtured my two sons, Adam and Brandon. I exerted every ounce of my being to ensure their advancement. I would awaken at dawn to frequent the market and dispense produce. In the afternoons, I would sit and craft garments for my neighbors, and at times I would remain awake until midnight, mending torn shirts and delivering them promptly. My hands became calloused and rough, my fingernails perpetually stained with soil from tending to the market stalls, but I never voiced a complaint. My sole aspiration was for Adam and Brandon to experience a life devoid of the hardships I endured. Adam, my eldest son, was my source of pride. He was robust, tall, and worked in construction, always returning home with boisterous laughter. Yet in recent years, he began to exhibit a decline in strength. Initially, it was mere fatigue. Then gradually, I observed his pallor and hollowed eyes, and once a terrifying dread seized me when he confessed to urinating blood. I embraced him and implored, "Adam, what is amiss, my child? Please tell me." He simply shook his head and offered a weak smile. "Do not fret, mother. It is likely a consequence of the strenuous labor." Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, entered our lives like an unpredictable gust of wind. She was strikingly beautiful. Her speech was melodious, and initially I genuinely believed she was a boon for Adam. She tended to him with unwavering diligence. She procured medications, monitored his dietary intake, and reminded him to take his pills at the precise hour. All the neighbors offered their praise. "You are exceptionally fortunate, Mrs. Jones, to have such a commendable daughter-in-law." And I concurred. Each instance I witnessed Rebecca offering a bowl of soup to Adam, I would tell myself I was merely succumbing to excessive worry. However, on occasion, I would catch a glimpse of her detached, calculating gaze, as if she were concealing something. Once I observed her in the backyard, engaged in a hushed, urgent telephone conversation late at night, her voice low but hurried. "Do not be concerned. Everything is proceeding according to our strategy." I inquired, "Rebecca, to whom are you speaking so late?" She appeared startled and offered a nervous chuckle. "Just a friend, Mother. Retire to your slumber." Brandon, my younger son, possessed a different disposition. He is 26 years of age. He resides a few blocks from my residence and works as a plumber and electrician. Brandon is a man of few words, but each time he visited, he would invariably bring sustenance, sometimes an assortment of oranges, other times freshly baked bread. He would sit beside me, tending to the incessantly squeaking ceiling fan or replacing a faulty light bulb in the kitchen. On one occasion, he met my gaze and stated, his voice deep, "Mother, do not exert yourself to the point of exhaustion. I cannot bear to see you so depleted." I simply smiled and gestured dismissively. "I can still manage, Brandon. You should concern yourself with your brother. He requires you more." But Brandon merely shook his head, his expression etched with profound concern. Mario, my little grandson, provided my sole solace during those challenging times. He is 9 years old and would frequently visit my home, his small backpack slung over his shoulders. Mario delighted in playing in the backyard with a collection of plastic cars I had acquired for him at a flea market. He would regale me with stories, innocent narratives that occasionally left me in a state of bewildered silence. On one occasion, he looked at me with his wide, innocent eyes and said, "Grandma, my mother speaks on the phone at night. I overheard her mention some medication, but I did not comprehend its purpose." I smiled and affectionately tousled his hair. "I am certain she was merely making inquiries of the physician regarding your father's condition. Do not dwell on it so, my dear." However, deep within, a seed of disquiet began to germinate, and then one afternoon everything underwent a transformation. I was in the kitchen preparing supper. The aroma of toasted rice wafted through the air when Rebecca entered. She offered no greeting. She did not smile. She simply stood with her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp, akin to a blade slicing through the air. "Mother," she declared, "the physician indicates that only your kidney is compatible. It is your responsibility. You must save him." I became paralyzed. The spoon in my hand slipped from my grasp and fell into the pan with a dull thud. I gazed at her, searching for a flicker of warmth in her eyes, but found only a cold resolve, bordering on an imperative. "Rebecca," I whispered, my throat feeling desiccated, "I know I will do anything for Adam." She nodded as if her objective had been achieved and turned to depart. Less than 10 minutes elapsed before Rebecca's parents arrived. They entered my home as though it were their own property. They took their seats at the dining room table and stated in unison, "Indeed, a mother's obligation is an immutable truth. This entire family now relies upon you." I remained standing, the spoon still in my hand, feeling utterly cornered. Adam, who at that moment was propped up in a chair, so emaciated I could barely recognize him, reached for my hand. His hand was ice cold. "Mother," he whispered, "I have faith that you will save me." I looked into his eyes, those same eyes that as a child had shone with such vitality, and now reflected only exhaustion and desperate entreaty. I nodded, incapable of uttering a word, suddenly feeling as though the confined space had become stifling. The scent of medicinal herbs emanating from Joe's concoction in the corner made me feel as though I could not draw breath. That evening, I brought Joe his customary bowl of soup. The persistent squeak of his wheelchair on the concrete floor served as a constant reminder that the entire family rested upon my shoulders. I placed the bowl before him. I observed him, but he merely sighed, offering no utterance. I wished to solicit his counsel, to inquire if I was making the correct decision, but he remained as inert as a shadow. I ventured into the backyard where Mario was engaged with his toy car. He looked up with his bright eyes, but they were clouded with uncertainty. "Grandma," he said, "what if someone becomes unwell because another individual is administering medication to them?" I froze mid-stride. My heart skipped a beat. "Why do you pose such a question, my dear?" I asked, attempting to maintain a semblance of composure. But Mario simply lowered his head and resumed pushing his car, offering no reply. Unbeknownst to me, at that very moment, I stood on the precipice of an abyss, and a mere few more steps would lead to my inevitable fall. In the days that followed that afternoon, when Rebecca visited and left me no recourse, my life felt crushed beneath an invisible weight, more oppressive than the sweltering Chicago summer heat. I continued my routine, rising early, venturing to the market to vend my produce and oranges, and then sitting beneath the dim illumination to stitch garments. However, my spirit found no tranquility. With every step I took, with every stitch I made, a question lingered. Am I acting justly? Must I truly engage in such a profound sacrifice? Yet Adam's pleading gaze, Rebecca's sharp pronouncements, and her parents' scrutinizing glances clung to me relentlessly, denying me even a moment's respite. The following morning, as the sun tentatively emerged, Rebecca was already present at my doorstep. I had just finished preparing tea. The fragrance of spearmint was beginning to fill the house when she entered without knocking, without offering a salutation. "Mother," she declared, her voice as firm as a driven nail, "the physician states that time is of the essence. If you continue to waver, he could be in peril." She placed a sheaf of medical documents upon the dining room table, pages filled with numerical data and signatures that I did not fully comprehend. She pointed to each line as though instructing a child. "It is explicitly stated here that you are the sole compatible donor. No one else can save him." I stood there, clutching the teapot. The hot water scalded my fingers, yet I felt no pain. I could only perceive the sound of the broom scraping against the concrete as I commenced sweeping the house, a tactic to evade Rebecca's piercing gaze. "I have heard you," I responded, my voice barely audible. "I will do everything for Adam." But internally, a heavy stone weighed me down, instilling a desperate urge to scream, to flee. I continued sweeping. The sound of the broom produced a mournful cadence, an attempt to drown out Rebecca's words. Yet she remained unyielding. She simply stood observing me, as if anticipating my acquiescence once more, a confirmation that I would not dare to refuse. When she departed, I sank into a chair and covered my face with my hands. I contemplated Adam, recalling the days when he was a small child, chasing after me at the market, clinging to my skirt and erupting in gleeful laughter. "Mother, when I grow up, I will build you a magnificent home." Now he lay there, gaunt, pallid, a mere shadow of his former self. I pondered if I could permit him to depart without taking any action. However, each time the prospect of donating my kidney arose, I was overcome by a profound sense of dread. A dread not of the surgical procedure itself, but of the pervasive feeling that I was being impelled towards something greater, something more sinister, something that remained shrouded in obscurity. That evening, Rebecca's parents paid a visit. They brought a basket brimming with fruit, including mangoes and oranges, but they merely placed it on the table as a perfunctory gesture and occupied the two principal chairs in the living room as if they were the proprietors of the establishment. Her father, Mr. Collins, cleared his throat a couple of times and stated, his voice raspy, "In my era, parents would readily relinquish all for their offspring. My grandmother divested all her land to preserve her son's life. Now it is your turn. You must emulate her actions." Rebecca's mother, Mrs. Peterson, nodded, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "Should you refuse, this family's honor will be dragged through the mud. What would the neighbors opine? They would declare that you do not cherish your son, that you are unworthy of maternal status." I sat there, my fingers clenching the edge of the table, feeling entrapped in a desolate corner. I yearned to articulate a response, to inquire why the entire burden fell upon me, but my mouth refused to open. I simply lowered my head and offered a slight nod, resembling an automaton. The supper that evening was as somber as a funeral repast. Rebecca, with a feigned amiability, placed a portion of chicken on my plate, yet her voice was devoid of warmth. "Mother, conserve your energy for the operation." I looked at the chicken on my plate, but I found myself unable to swallow. Adam sat opposite me, his countenance gaunt and his eyes sunken. He attempted a weak smile. "Mother, I am confident you will save me, just as you have always rescued me when I was a child." His words struck me like a physical blow. I recollected the days when he suffered from a severe fever, and I would remain awake throughout the night, dabbing him with cool cloths, or the occasions when he fell from his bicycle, and I would rush to bandage his wounds. I was perpetually present. I was invariably the mother prepared to undertake any measure. But this time, why did I feel such profound apprehension? Brandon sat in a corner of the table, silent as a spectre. He abstained from eating. He merely stirred the spoon in his bowl of soup, his gaze never straying from Rebecca. I observed his expression, filled with suspicion, as though he were endeavouring to discern the true nature of my daughter-in-law's facade. I wished to question him, but I dared not. The atmosphere in the room was thick with unspoken tension. The sole audible sound was the clinking of spoons against plates, each like a hammer blow against my conscience. Following supper, Rebecca rose and personally conveyed Adam's plate to the kitchen for washing, permitting no one else to handle it. She performed this task with haste, but I observed her scrutinizing the plate with meticulous care, as if apprehensive that someone might detect something concealed within. That night, sleep eluded me. Reclining in my aged bed, I listened to the incessant ticking of the wall clock. Each second served as a stark reminder that Adam's time was rapidly diminishing. I arose and proceeded down the hallway to fetch a glass of water. It was then that I overheard hushed voices emanating from Adam and Rebecca's chamber. I paused, standing in the darkness, my breath held captive. Rebecca's voice was low but distinct. "Yes, subsequent to the transplant, we shall possess all the pertinent data. Do not concern yourself. She will not venture to refuse." I stood there, my heart pounding furiously, my hands trembling so violently that I had to brace myself against the wall to maintain my equilibrium. Data? What were they discussing? I felt an overwhelming urge to knock on the door, to confront her directly, but precisely at that moment, Rebecca opened it. She appeared startled to see me, then offered a disingenuous smile. "Still awake, Mother? I was merely inquiring about his medication." I nodded and turned away, but I felt as though thorns had been plunged into my heart. Rebecca's smile, her tone, all of it was utterly false, a facade concealing something truly dreadful. In the days that followed the intensely charged conversation with Rebecca and her parents, I felt as though I were navigating a nebulous dreamscape, where familiar elements transformed into unsettling and terrifying apparitions. I continued to perform my daily chores, venturing to the market to sell my wares, sewing garments, and preparing meals for my husband Joe. However, each action was executed with a mechanical, soulless detachment. My heart felt heavy, as if an immense, dark cloud perpetually loomed overhead, and Rebecca's words, Adam's imploring gaze, they swirled incessantly in my mind, affording me not a single moment of peace. But then, one afternoon, when Mario, my 9-year-old grandson, came to visit, the first fissure appeared in the edifice of trust I was desperately attempting to maintain. Mario entered, his sneakers bearing the marks of mud, his small hands still sticky with paint from art class. He deposited his worn backpack in a corner, sat on the floor, and retrieved the plastic car I had purchased for him at the flea market the previous year. I observed him attempting to muster a smile, but my thoughts were in disarray. Mario had always been a beacon of light during my darker days, with his innocent tales and his crystalline laughter, but that day his demeanor was somber. He pushed the car back and forth on the floor, his expression lost and distant. And then he raised his head and fixed his gaze upon me. "Grandma," he stated, his voice low but remarkably clear, "what if my father isn't ill due to life's circumstances, but because someone is deliberately administering medication to him?" I flinched as if I had been struck. The spoon in my hand nearly slipped, but I managed to grasp it, my hand trembling. "Why would you suggest such a thing, Mario?" I inquired, attempting to modulate my voice into a calm tone, but my heart was pounding erratically. I looked into his eyes, which were so clear, yet filled with a disquiet that seemed far too profound for his tender age. Mario did not respond immediately. He lowered his head and continued to play with his car, but I noticed him clenching his fist, as if suppressing a significant revelation. I longed to embrace him, to delve deeper into his thoughts, but all I managed was a nervous laugh. "You are overthinking, my dear boy. Your father is unwell and the physicians are attending to his recovery." But my smile was strained, and Mario did not reciprocate it. He simply regarded me with an unblinking stare. He then silently arose, gathered his backpack, and departed swiftly for his home. Mario's inquiry had been akin to a stone cast into the placid waters of my heart, generating ripples of profound doubt. I remained in my small kitchen, my gaze fixed upon the vegetables laid out on the table, yet utterly incapable of concentration. My thoughts turned to Adam, to the multitude of pill bottles Rebecca consistently supplied, and to the extent to which she controlled every aspect of my son's well-being. I attempted to rationalize, telling myself that I was likely fabricating these anxieties. Rebecca was Adam's wife. She adored him. She would never intentionally harm him. Yet deep within the core of my being, an unshakable conviction persisted. Something was profoundly amiss. That afternoon, Brandon arrived, his toolbox in hand, stating his intention to repair the kitchen light that had been flickering erratically the previous night. I watched as he ascended the ladder, tightened and adjusted various components, and soon the radiance from the newly installed bulb illuminated the entire kitchen. As he descended with the outdated light bulb in his grip, Brandon regarded me with an uncommon gravity. "Mother," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "My sister-in-law is behaving quite erratically. I noticed some unlabeled pill containers within my brother's medication cabinet, and she keeps them exceedingly well concealed." I recoiled, and the dish I was cleansing in the basin slipped, showering my blouse with water. "What are you implying?" I managed to ask, my voice thick with emotion. Brandon dismounted the ladder and stood before me, his gaze etched with worry. "Mum, I fear my brother's ailment is not of a natural origin. I'm concerned someone—" He trailed off, but his expression conveyed the unspoken dread. I stood there, my hands slick with moisture, feeling as though the very ground beneath my feet was dissolving. I yearned to shout at Brandon, to dismiss his fears as overthinking, to insist Rebecca was incapable of such a heinous act. Yet no sound escaped my lips. My eyes remained fixed on Brandon, and within the confines of my mind, Mario's question resurfaced with unnerving clarity. What if my father's malady stems from someone administering medication to him? I attempted to banish the thought, but it adhered to me like a persistent shadow, inescapable. The following afternoon, I brought soup to Adam at the hospital. The stark white room and the pervasive scent of disinfectant created a suffocating atmosphere. Adam lay propped up, emaciated, with IV lines in both arms, yet he mustered a smile upon seeing me. "Mom, you're already here?" he rasped, his voice frail. I placed the bowl on the bedside table, and as I reached to offer him the first spoonful, I noticed Rebecca beside the bed, holding a glass of water. She artfully dropped a peculiarly coloured pill into the glass. It was a swift motion, so rapid that had I not been observing intently, I would have missed it entirely. Upon my arrival, she seemed startled, spilling a small amount of water onto the floor. "What pill is that, Rebecca?" I inquired, striving for a semblance of composure. She offered a smile, though it was strained and unconvincing. "It's a supplement for his kidneys. The physician prescribed it." I gave a slow nod, a shiver coursing through my veins. Maintaining my calm became an impossible task. After Adam finished his meal, I sought out the on-call physician, a middle-aged man with thick spectacles. "Doctor," I began, my voice quivering, "did you prescribe any new kidney supplements for Adam?" He appeared surprised and consulted his chart. "No, we have not prescribed anything new. His current regimen is sufficient." His response left me utterly frozen. I found myself standing in the hospital corridor, the disembodied announcements from the loudspeaker fading into insignificance as my mind went blank. Rebecca had deliberately misled me. What was that pill, and why the desperate need to conceal it? As dusk settled, Mario reappeared at my home. This time he eschewed his toy car. He sat in a chair and retrieved an aged cell phone with a cracked screen from his backpack. "Grandma," he stated, his tone low yet resolute, "I want you to listen to this." He manipulated the device and handed it to me. A recording began to play. It was Rebecca's voice, a hushed whisper, yet undeniably clear. "Following the transplant, the test results will be perfect. Do not worry, she will not dare to refuse." The phone slipped from my grasp. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I looked at Mario, my young grandson, and observed that his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he shared my profound fear. "I discovered it on my mother's old phone," he confessed, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm not sure what it signifies, but I believed you ought to be aware." I embraced Mario, struggling to suppress my tears. "You are incredibly courageous, my boy," I whispered. Internally, however, everything was crumbling. Test results. What was Rebecca referring to? My thoughts turned to Adam, to the unlabeled containers, to Brandon's suspicious gaze, to the peculiar coloured pill nestled in the glass of water. These were disparate fragments of a larger picture, and with each passing moment they began to coalesce, forming an image I hesitated to confront directly. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat in the hushed stillness of my home, the rhythmic ticking of the clock a constant reminder that Adam's time was rapidly diminishing. One morning, I arrived at the hospital bearing a vintage plastic container filled with a home-cooked meal. The aroma of rice and stewed meat wafted from its edges. Adam's room remained a stark white and unnervingly cold, the disinfectant smell so overpowering that breathing felt like a chore. I had grown accustomed to this environment, but on this particular day, it pressed down on my chest with suffocating weight. Adam lay there, his eyes hollowed and his face pale, yet he managed a weak smile upon my arrival. "Mum, you're here so early," he murmured, his voice as faint as a sigh. I placed the food on the nightstand, attempting a smile that felt hollow against the tempest raging within me. The doubts from preceding days, Mario's query, Brandon's warning all clamoured in my mind, denying me any peace. Rebecca was already present, seated beside Adam's bed, her gaze fixed on the slowly dripping IV bag. She offered no greeting, no acknowledgement of my presence, merely a silent nod as if my arrival was an inconsequential event. On the nightstand, my attention was drawn to a small pill bottle, its cap partially obscured by a crumpled paper napkin. The container bore no label. It was a simple white plastic vessel holding peculiar blue pills. I picked it up, my voice steady despite the tremor within. What medication is this, Rebecca? She flinched, nearly leaping from her seat, and snatched the bottle from my hand with such alacrity that I was forced to step back. They're just vitamins, Mom, she stated, her smile as artificial as poorly applied paint. The doctor prescribed them to aid his kidneys. I nodded, a profound chill descending upon me. Rebecca's disingenuous smile, the frantic way she seized the bottle, everything felt fundamentally wrong, as though she were guarding a secret I was forbidden to discover. I sat beside Adam and began to feed him, but my mind was miles away. I pondered the unlabeled container, Brandon's unsettling remarks about Rebecca's hidden medications, and Mario's innocent yet piercing question. What if my father is ill because someone is administering medicine to him? The urge to confront Rebecca directly, to demand the truth, was almost overwhelming. Yet a paralyzing fear held me captive. I was terrified that a single word would unravel everything, leading to the irreversible loss of Adam. Gazing at my son as he struggled with each mouthful, I admonished myself, Mary, you must remain composed. You need to ascertain the full extent of this situation first. At midday, Brandon arrived at the hospital. He entered, his hand still bearing the telltale grease stains from his work, his old shirt frayed at the shoulders. He remained silent, occupying a corner, his eyes fixed on Rebecca, who was engaged in conversation with a nurse down the hall. Once she departed, Brandon approached me and retrieved a small plastic bag from his backpack. Mum, I want you to see this, he whispered, his voice taut as a guitar string. He presented his phone. Blurry yet discernibly clear, images appeared on the screen, sufficient to make my heart seize. It was Rebecca in the hospital parking lot, Brandon explained, his voice trembling, discreetly taking a small bag from her car's trunk and handing it to an unidentified man. He wore a black jacket and a cap that obscured most of his face, but I could clearly see the bag of medicine in Rebecca's hand. He continued, I captured these photographs yesterday. I had been following her because her behavior struck me as exceptionally peculiar. Mum, I'm afraid she's doing something to my brother Adam. I was rendered speechless, my grip on the phone tightening so intensely that my knuckles turned white. The cold hospital floor seemed to absorb all bodily warmth. Brandon, I managed, my voice a mere breath. Are you certain? Did you overhear their conversation? Brandon shook his head, his eyes glistening. I couldn't discern much, but I witnessed her hand over the bag, and he gave her an envelope. Mum, this is not normal. I met Brandon's gaze, observing the deep concern and palpable rage within his eyes, and I knew he was not fabricating. Yet a part of me stubbornly refused to accept it. Rebecca was Adam's wife. She had pledged to care for him. How could she be involved in something so profoundly sinister? That afternoon, upon my return home, Mario visited once more. He did not engage in his usual playful antics. Instead, he sat quietly in a chair, clutching his backpack. Grandma, he stated, his voice low but unwavering, I want you to hear something. From his backpack, he produced the aged cell phone with the cracked screen and, with trembling hands, played an audio file. Rebecca's voice resonated, a hushed whisper, yet its clarity pierced my heart like a shard of ice. After the transplant, the data will be complete. Do not worry, that old woman will not dare to refuse. This outcome is worth 100 times more. I stiffened, my entire body rigid. The phone clattered onto the table as my hands shook violently. I looked at my young grandson, observing his reddened eyes and the tight compression of his lips, as if he were holding back tears. I found it on my mother's old phone, he confessed, his voice thick with unshed tears. I don't know what it means, but I thought you should know. I pulled Mario into a tight embrace, a profound sense of the world collapsing around me. "You're so incredibly brave, Mario," I whispered, my voice breaking as tears streamed down my face. My thoughts raced. Adam, the unlabeled vials, Brandon's photographic evidence, Mario's disturbing recording. These were scattered fragments, but they were steadily converging, painting a grim tableau I lacked the courage to fully examine. What was Rebecca orchestrating? What data was she referring to? What results was she anticipating? And why did she believe an elderly woman would be powerless to refuse? I felt a deep sense of betrayal, not solely by Rebecca, but by my very faith in family and love. That night, sleep remained a distant prospect. I sat alone in my silent house, the piercing wail of an ambulance siren piercing the night, its flashing red and blue lights streaking through the window like raw wounds across my soul. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Adam, his daily decline, the mysterious medications, Rebecca's calculating whispers. I recalled Brandon's troubled eyes, filled with suspicion and worry, and Mario, the 9-year-old who had bravely delivered the truth. I pressed my hands to my head, a sensation akin to my brain threatening to detonate. I desperately wanted to rush to the hospital, confront Rebecca, to scream and demand an explanation, but an overwhelming fear paralyzed me. I was afraid the reality would be far more horrific than my current imaginings. I was afraid I would lack the fortitude to bear it. I rose, stepped out into the backyard, and gazed up at the pale moonlight. My thoughts drifted to Joe, my silent husband, relegated to merely witnessing these unfolding events. I longed to speak with him, to seek his counsel, but I knew he could offer no reply. I was utterly alone, confronted by fragmented truths that were slowly, inexorably revealing themselves. The following morning, I awoke with a crushing weight on my chest. The cheerful chirping of birds in the backyard, a sound that usually brought me solace, now felt like a torment, each note a stab to my mind. I knew this was the day the hospital would render the final decision regarding Adam's kidney transplant. The clues provided by Mario and Brandon, the recording, the photographs, the unlabeled vial, they continued to swirl relentlessly in my thoughts. Yet I hesitated to truly confront them, fearing that deeper investigation would unearth a truth I could not possibly endure. My sole desire was to save Adam, to witness my son restored to health, even if it meant sacrificing a part of myself. But deep down, I sensed the situation was far more complex. The hospital had scheduled my appointment for noon. I entered a small conference room where Dr. Evans was already awaiting me. He spread the lab results across the table, pages filled with numbers and graphs that held no meaning for me. "Mrs. Jones," he stated, his voice grave yet firm, "we have thoroughly reviewed all the data. You are the most compatible candidate for donating a kidney to Adam. If we do not proceed soon, his life will be in imminent danger." I sat there, my fingers clenching the edge of my blouse, my head filled with a cacophony, as if a swarm of bees had taken up residence within. "I understand," I whispered, my voice so low I doubted he had heard me. Dr. Evans met my gaze, his expression softening. "Do you require additional time to consider this?" I shook my head, not because I had already made up my mind, but because I felt utterly devoid of alternatives. Rebecca, her parents, even Adam himself, they were all depending on me, and I could not bear the thought of my son perishing. Through the glass of the door, I observed Rebecca standing with her arms crossed. Her gaze, as sharp as ever, flicked towards her mother, Mrs. Peterson, a subtle nod conveying an unspoken certainty that I would not dare to refuse. That gesture sent a chill through me, as if we were engaged in a chess match and I was merely a pawn. I yearned to rise, to expose my knowledge of the vial, of the recording, but I was immobilized. I remained seated, feeling ensnared within an invisible cage, utterly without escape. That evening, I convened the entire family in my modest home. The living room was crowded, the room bathed in the yellowish glow of an antiquated bulb, reflecting off the worn walls. I placed a teapot on the table. The faint scent of spearmint was insufficient to dispel the oppressive atmosphere. Rebecca's parents, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, occupied the central chairs, as if they were the rightful proprietors of the space. Rebecca sat beside them, her hands clasped, casting sidelong glances at me, seemingly to ensure I would not waver. Adam was reclined on a sofa, his face ashen, his breathing shallow. Brandon leaned against the wall, his silence punctuated by red-rimmed eyes as if he were suppressing an imminent eruption of fury. Mario huddled in a corner, clutching his small backpack, his eyes brimming with distress. I drew a deep breath. My hands trembled as I set the teapot down. "I have made a decision," I announced, my voice wavering but striving for firmness. "I will donate my kidney to Adam." The room erupted as if a bomb had detonated. Mrs. Peterson applauded, exclaiming in a shrill voice, "That is a true mother. I knew you would not disappoint this family." Rebecca covered her face, tears streaming down, yet I noticed the clenching of her fists, a performance worthy of the stage. "Oh, Mom," she choked out, "I knew you loved him more than anyone. Thank you." Adam managed a weak, grateful look, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. "Mom, I owe you my life," he whispered. His words struck me like a dagger to the heart. But then Brandon sprang to his feet, slamming his hand onto the table. The sharp impact caused the teacups to vibrate. "No!" he bellowed, his voice thick with rage. "Mum, don't you see? You are sacrificing yourself for a wicked scheme. She is using you, and she is using my brother, Adam." The air in the room grew heavy, the only sound the persistent buzzing of a fly near the light bulb. Rebecca leaped up, pointing accusingly at Brandon. "What are you saying? How dare you accuse me? I do everything for my husband." But Brandon stood his ground, advancing closer, his gaze ablaze. "Accuse you? And what about those unlabeled bottles and those midnight calls? Mum, you cannot allow them to deceive you." I looked from Brandon to Rebecca, and finally to Adam. I wanted to interject, to implore Brandon to calm himself, but I was unable. I simply averted my gaze, feeling as though the entire world was collapsing upon me. That night, I sat alone in my small room, facing the old wooden table. The oil lamp flickered, its dim light illuminating the trembling words I was inscribing in my will. I bequeathed the modest house to Brandon and a few of my cherished possessions to Mario. Each stroke of the pen felt like a wound to my soul. I was uncertain of my survival post-operation, but I wished to ensure that something remained for those I loved. Joe sat motionless in his wheelchair in a corner, his vacant eyes fixed upon me. I observed his hand tremble as if he yearned to speak but was unable. I looked at him and tears streamed down my gaunt cheeks. "Joe, I must do this. I have to save Adam." He offered no response, merely blinking, 2 tears tracing paths down his withered cheeks. I folded the will and placed it at the bottom of an old wooden box containing mementos from my wedding day. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, mingling with the sound of my own sobs. In the early hours of the morning, when the sky was still dark and a thick fog clung to the narrow streets leading to the hospital, I lay on a gurney inside an ambulance. I clutched a small fabric bag containing a change of clothes and an embroidered handkerchief I had kept since my wedding day. The ambulance siren wailed, but its sound no longer registered. Streetlights filtered through the window, blurred like the fragments of my shattered dreams. I closed my eyes, attempting to draw a breath, but my chest felt heavy. Today was the day I would donate my kidney to Adam, my son. My decision was made, my will was written. I had prepared myself mentally, yet my heart remained a tangled knot, as if I were entering a nightmare from which there was no awakening. Upon arrival, a nurse propelled the gurney down an interminable hospital corridor. The screeching of the wheels on the tiled floor echoed like a relentless hammer against my skull. Rebecca walked directly behind me, her steps light yet firm, akin to those of a sentinel. "Do not worry, mother," she stated, her voice low but sharp. "After the surgery, all will be well." I caught a glimpse of her from the corner of my eye and saw a flicker of triumph in her gaze, as if her victory was already assured. Her smile sent a shiver down my spine, not from cold, but from the chilling realization that I was being led into a meticulously crafted plan, where I was merely a pawn, devoid of agency. At the reception desk, Rebecca's parents, Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, were already present, impeccably dressed. Mr. Collins sported an aged but perfectly pressed suit, while Mrs. Peterson wore a vibrant red dress, as though attending a grand event rather than a surgical procedure. They took Rebecca's arm and greeted the doctors with an exaggerated cordiality, as if they shared a lifelong acquaintance. I overheard Mrs. Peterson's hearty laughter as she addressed a young doctor. "Thank you for all your support, doctor. We shall not forget this favor." I stood there, clutching my fabric bag, feeling like an alien in my own narrative. Adam had already been taken to a pre-operative room. They granted me a brief visit before I was wheeled into the operating theatre. The small room was frigid, his emaciated arms adorned with numerous IV lines. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. Yet upon seeing me, he managed a weak smile. "Mum, thank you," he whispered, his voice strained with exhaustion. I took his hand. It was icy, and I fought the urge to weep. "Adam, I will do everything in my power to ensure you recover," I assured him, my voice trembling, as if I were trying to convince myself as much as him. I looked into my son's eyes, seeing absolute trust reflected there, and a question formed. Am I making the right choice, or am I jeopardizing my life for something I don't fully comprehend? Suddenly, Brandon burst in, his hands still smudged with grease from his work. He was panting, his shirt drenched in sweat as if he had run a considerable distance. "Mum, please don't do this," he pleaded, grabbing me by the shoulders. "I implore you, do not donate the kidney. Something is terribly wrong." I looked at Brandon, his red eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and concern. I wanted to tell him that my decision was final, that I could not let Adam die, but the words caught in my throat. I simply placed my hand on his, squeezed it gently, and allowed the nurse to escort me away. Brandon remained behind, powerless, shouting after me, "Mum, listen to me!" But I did not turn back. I dared not, fearing that if I met Brandon's gaze, I would shatter completely. The hospital corridor stretched long and cold, the disinfectant odor so potent it induced nausea. An impersonal voice announced over the loudspeaker, "Operating room number 3, prepare for kidney transplant." I was escorted to a changing room where a nurse placed a cap and mask upon me. The frigid blue gown they handed me served as a stark reminder that I was about to relinquish a part of my body. I caught my reflection in the mirror, my gaunt face, my eyes shadowed by dark circles. I posed the question to myself, "Mary, what are you doing? Are you certain this is the correct path?" But then the image of Adam lying frail in the hospital bed materialized in my mind, and I gritted my teeth and proceeded. As I moved down the hallway, I observed Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson conversing with an unidentified man through a glass partition. He wore a black jacket and a cap that obscured his face, identical to the individual in the photograph Brandon had shown me. I witnessed Rebecca hand him an envelope, which he swiftly concealed within his jacket pocket. My heart began to pound erratically. A cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck. What were they doing? What was contained within that envelope? I yearned to halt, to cry out and demand an explanation, but the nurse gently guided my arm, leading me into the operating room. The stark operating room lights bore down, forcing a wince. Dr. Evans, his demeanour a picture of composed gravity, confirmed, "Everything is prepared, Mrs. Jones. Please try to remain at ease." A silent acknowledgement passed between us as I offered a slight nod, though my limbs felt like stone. A nurse attached electrodes to my torso, their steady beeping on the cardiac monitor a relentless drumbeat, each pulse a foreboding whisper. Across the sterile divide of glass, Rebecca's face appeared pressed close. She gestured urgently towards documents held by another attendant. My hand, trembling, reached for the pen, its tip smudging the paper as the ink bled. Signing felt like inscribing my own final testament. My gaze fell upon my blurred signature, a stark reminder of the will I'd finalized the prior evening, of Brandon, and of Mario. A chilling question echoed. Would this be my last moment of awareness? Just as the physician prepared to administer the anesthetic, my heart hammered against my ribs with frantic intensity. A clammy sweat saturated my back. I closed my eyes, attempting to draw breath, but the faces of Adam, Brandon, Mario, and Rebecca swirled in a dizzying kaleidoscope. I recalled Mario's audio recording, the unmarked vial, Brandon's photograph. I yearned to halt the unfolding events, but the point of no return had been crossed. I had affixed my signature. I had entered this chamber. All that remained was to lie there, suspended in a dread that threatened to engulf me. Then, at the precipice of the anesthetic injection, a violent crash reverberated, shaking the entire room. The door burst inward, its hinges screaming a ragged protest. A wave of shock rippled through the medical staff. Startled glances darted about, some reflecting a nascent panic. Mario, a small hurricane of motion, stormed in, his mud-splattered sneakers leaving faint tracks. His school uniform was rumpled, his small chest heaving with ragged breaths. Clutched in his hand as if it were a priceless artifact was his well-worn mobile phone, its screen fractured. A nurse rushed after him, her pleas desperate. "Child, you mustn't enter! Good heavens, stop!" But Mario pressed onward, his large, round eyes wide with apprehension, yet blazing with an uncharacteristic resolve. "Grandma," he stammered, his voice a fragile thread, yet clear enough to silence the room. "I need to tell everyone why my father truly requires your kidney." His pronouncement struck like a concussive blast, detonating within my mind. I held my breath, my heart seeming to pause. The operating theatre descended into an unnerving quiet, punctuated only by the insistent beeping of the heart monitor, now amplified, as if straining to break the profound stillness. A nearby physician's hand dropped a pair of surgical forceps. Their metallic clang against the polished floor was jarring, a sharp fissure in the tense atmosphere. Dr. Evans, the lead surgeon, raised a hand, a silent command for the entire team to halt. He frowned, but his voice, when it came, was measured and firm. "Let the boy speak. Whatever you have to say, utter it now." My gaze met Mario's. I saw his small hand tightly gripping the phone, his face ashen but his eyes luminous, as though burdened by an immense responsibility. "Get out!" Rebecca's voice, sharp and furious, pounded against the glass partition, the impact resonating. "Don't listen to him," she shrieked, her tone high and strained. "You'll see," she continued, her voice faltering. Rebecca's outward composure had fractured. Her gaze was no longer chillingly detached, but trembled with sheer terror, as if the secret she had guarded so fiercely was on the verge of exposure. Unwavering, Mario approached, bypassing his mother's frantic protests. With unsteady hands, he initiated playback on his mobile device. A recording emanated from the speaker, Rebecca's voice hushed but distinct. The transplant procedure, the test results will be flawless. Rest assured, that elderly woman wouldn't dare refuse. The room seemed to implode with an unspoken dread. A chill like ice permeated my being, my breath catching in my throat. Dr. Evans turned abruptly, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Halt," he commanded, his voice as incisive as a scalpel. "Cease all preparations immediately." A nurse swiftly withdrew the syringe. The remaining personnel stood frozen, paralyzed. Beyond the glass, Rebecca let out a strangled cry, striking the door. "It's untrue, he's been coached." Her voice cracked, betraying her own wavering conviction. I looked at Mario, witnessing his tears begin to fall. Yet he continued to clutch the phone, a desperate anchor to my potential salvation. "I have a video too," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "It's when my mother and grandparents were discussing selling the medications." He pressed play and an image flickered to life on the small screen. Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson in the parking area, exchanging an envelope with the unidentified man I had previously encountered. Mrs. Peterson's voice was audible. "Following this operation, we will possess ample data to market the medication internationally. This revenue stream will fundamentally alter our circumstances." I lay there, my vision blurred by a deluge of tears, wrestling with a potent cocktail of horror and liberation. Horror at the truth I had desperately sought to evade, now laid bare before all, and liberation from the burden of self-deception. Brandon, his face flushed with incandescent rage, stormed in from the corridor. "Enough!" he bellowed, hurling himself against the glass partition, confronting Rebecca directly. "You poisoned him. Did you truly believe we were all oblivious?" Before any reaction could materialize, Brandon raised his hand, the sharp crack of flesh against flesh echoing down the hallway, immediately met by Mrs. Peterson's horrified shriek. "How dare you strike my daughter?" But Brandon's fury remained undiluted. He pointed a trembling finger at Rebecca, his voice resonating with barely suppressed wrath. "What substances have you been administering to him? What have you done to my brother Adam?" Rebecca touched her cheek, tears coursing down her face, yet her eyes betrayed not remorse, but the stark terror of discovery. "You're delusional," she screamed, turning her accusatory glare towards Dr. Evans. "Ignore them, they are fabricating falsehoods." Dr. Evans offered no reply. His countenance drained of colour as he addressed a nurse, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "This is no longer a surgical procedure. This has become a crime scene. Summon the authorities at once." A nurse departed swiftly, while the others exchanged bewildered glances. I remained immobile, feeling the foundations of my world erode. Tears streamed down my face unchecked. I looked at Mario, my grandson, whose courage had pierced the sterile sanctuary of the operating room to rescue me. I observed Brandon, my younger son, whose fierce protectiveness was palpable, and my thoughts turned to Adam, my son, resting in the adjacent room, unaware that the wife he cherished had orchestrated his torment. I lay there, allowing the tears to flow, surrendering to the truth that was now permeating every fibre of my being. In that profound instant, I recognized that everything had irrevocably shifted. The truth had erupted, shattering the silence like a breached dam, leaving no possibility of concealment. The operating theatre, once a place of hushed solemnity, had transformed into a tempestuous arena. The bewildered nurses exchanged uncertain looks, their protocols rendered obsolete. Dr. Evans, his brow furrowed, his sharp gaze sweeping across each individual, seemed to strive for a semblance of order amidst the unfolding chaos. I remained prone, my vision obscured by tears, yet incapable of diverting my eyes from the unfolding drama. The revelation Mario had so bravely delivered was a consuming fire, incinerating the last vestiges of my trust. Rebecca, nursing her cheek from Brandon's blow, let out a piercing cry. "How dare you strike me? I do everything for my husband." Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes offered a clear window into her mounting panic. This was not the distress of an unfairly accused spouse, but the primal fear of one caught in the act. She turned to her parents, her hand clutching Mrs. Peterson's blouse, her voice choked with desperation. "I have committed no wrongdoing. My sole intention was to save Adam. Father, mother, say something." Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, however, stood rigid, their faces ashen, utterly speechless. Mrs. Peterson, typically so shrewd and imperious, now merely clenched her hands, her lips pressed together to suppress a tremor. Abruptly, Mrs. Peterson's cane struck the floor with a sharp, dry sound that reverberated across the tiles. Her finger pointed directly at me. "You had the audacity to manipulate your grandson into fabricating lies about me, you wicked old woman." Her accusation was a physical blow. I longed to cry out, to refute her baseless claim, to expose her daughter's treachery. Yet a knot in my throat rendered me mute. I could only meet her gaze, feeling cornered, trapped in a darkness where my years of sacrifice were being trampled. Mr. Collins, Rebecca's father, leaned discreetly towards a familiar doctor, whispering urgently, "Please proceed with the surgery. We will manage all consequences. We simply require this to conclude." He discreetly pressed an envelope into the doctor's hand, but Dr. Evans immediately intervened, his voice chillingly cold. "The law dictates here, not wealth." He snatched the envelope, discarded it onto the floor, and instructed a nurse, "Seal the exits. No one departs. I will inform hospital administration immediately." The decisive sound of his footsteps underscored the gravity of the situation, a clear indication that events had spiraled beyond control. Brandon, disregarding a nurse's attempt to restrain him, burst from the hallway into the operating chamber. He grasped me by the shoulders, his eyes raw with emotion. "Mum, do not donate the kidney. This is all their scheme. She poisoned my brother. Can't you see, Adam?" Brandon's voice quivered, laden with anguish and fury. I looked into his eyes, witnessing the desperate plea of a son desperate to shield his mother. I longed to offer solace, to reassure him, but I was rendered immobile. I could only remain where I was, feeling the very ground beneath me disintegrate. From the adjacent preparation suite, Adam's faint, confused voice drifted. "What is happening? Why are they arguing?" He attempted to sit up, his breathing labored. The intravenous lines attached to his arm trembled with his movement. Hearing my son's voice was a torment, shattering my heart into 1,000 pieces. Adam was utterly unaware. He had no inkling that the woman he adored, the one he trusted implicitly, had plunged the entire family into a web of clandestine deceit. I yearned to rush to his side, to embrace him, to assure him of his safety. But my body refused to obey. I remained there, tears streaming, torn between my profound love for Adam and the devastating truth now brought to light. Mario, standing beside me, erupted into sobs, yet managed to raise his cell phone. "I have another video," he choked out. "This is where my mother gives the medications to my grandparents." He played the recording, and the image materialized on the small screen. Rebecca and Mrs. Peterson in the parking lot, completing the illicit exchange with the same unknown man. Mrs. Peterson's voice, sharp and cold, declared, "If the transplant proves successful, we can illicitly market the medication abroad. This capital will enable us to legitimize all illicit gains." A hush fell over the entire room. A nurse covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Dr. Evans stood frozen, his grip tightening on the patient file, an outward manifestation of his suppressed rage. Rebecca, in a fit of panic, lunged to snatch the phone from Mario, intending to destroy it. "No, it's fabricated," she shrieked, her voice cracking, but Brandon was quicker. He intercepted the phone, pushing Rebecca backward. She stumbled and fell, one of her high heels dislodged, skittering across the floor with a dry click, a percussive punctuation to the charade she had orchestrated. "Silence yourself!" Brandon roared, his face contorted with fury. "Do you presume to deceive everyone? What exactly did you do to my brother Adam?" Rebecca sat on the floor, her hair disheveled, but a flicker of defiance remained in her eyes. "I did nothing. You are slandering me." Hospital security arrived, two uniformed officers entering with grim expressions. They approached Rebecca, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Peterson, affording them no opportunity to resist. Mrs. Peterson, still spewing curses, her cane trembling in her grasp, declared, "Traitor! You have annihilated this family." Her accusatory finger pointed at me, but her voice faltered as if even she recognized the finality of the situation. Rebecca was firmly restrained, struggling futilely. "Let me go, I have done nothing wrong." Her gaze now reflected only the raw desperation of an individual cornered. I lay motionless, my body chilled, but my eyes wide open, observing the unfolding truth before me. As the operating room door swung shut behind the departing police, the shrieks of Rebecca and her parents continued to echo in the hospital corridors, but for me they faded like a dissipating nightmare. Rebecca's broken cries persisted. I was contributing to scientific advancement. No one comprehends me. But no one offered a response. Mr. Collins and Mrs. Peterson, who had once occupied my living room with such haughty arrogance, now walked with heads bowed, escorted in silence. I remained on the operating table, my body still quivering, but no longer from fear. A profound sense of relief washed over me as if I had been liberated from an unseen cage. Dr. Evans approached, his expression grave, but his eyes held a newfound softness. "Mrs. Jones," he stated in a solemn tone, "we have postponed the surgery. Adam will be transferred to an alternative treatment regimen involving dialysis combined with new pharmacological interventions. You jeopardized your own well-being in preparation for this, but in doing so, you have preserved his life and your integrity." I met his gaze, tears coursing down my cheeks, unheeded. "Thank you, Doctor," I whispered, my voice frail but imbued with genuine gratitude. Whether my dignity was truly salvaged remained uncertain, but for the first time in months I felt the liberating sensation of truly breathing. Brandon rushed to my side, assisting me into a seated position. He grasped my hand firmly, his gaze steady yet etched with pain. "You still have me, Mother," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "I will safeguard you from this point forward. I give you my word." I squeezed his hand, drawing comfort from the warmth of his skin, rough and stained with grease. Looking into Brandon's eyes, I saw the unwavering strength of a son prepared to bear the weight of the world to protect his mother. "You are my pride, my son," I murmured, tears flowing anew. Brandon offered no verbal reply, simply enveloping me in a tight embrace. Within that embrace, I found a measure of solace amidst the wreckage of my family. Adam was moved to a recovery room. Upon entering, I found him reclining, his face pallid, the IV lines still connected to his arms. He met my gaze with red-rimmed eyes and asked weakly, "Mother, is it true that my wife's actions were intended to cause me harm?" His question pierced me like a physical wound. I moved closer, sat on the edge of the bed beside him, and enfolded him in my arms. My tears fell, moistening his hospital gown. "Oh, Adam, my son," I choked out, my voice trembling. "I do not know the genesis of all this, but I assure you I will not permit anyone to inflict further harm upon you." Adam lowered his head, tears tracing paths down his gaunt cheeks. "Mother, I was wrong," he whispered. "I failed to protect you, and I allowed you to suffer excessively." I held him tighter, feeling as though in this vast world it was merely the two of us, clinging to each other in the aftermath of the recent storm. In the ensuing days, the local press began to dissect the affair. "Drug trafficking ring dismantled at local medical facility," screamed the headlines. The reports detailed a conspiracy involving medical professionals, with Rebecca, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Peterson identified as central figures. They were implicated in conducting illicit drug trials on patients, Adam among them, using the kidney transplant as a deceptive pretext to gather data for an international syndicate. Reading these accounts filled me with a profound mixture of horror and anguish. I contemplated Rebecca, recalling moments when she had served me meals, her honeyed words now revealed as venomous deceit. My thoughts returned to Adam, to the months of suffering he endured, oblivious to the peril orchestrated by his own wife. Adam commenced his dialysis and medication regimen. His health began a slow but discernible improvement. One afternoon, he took my hand, lowered his head, and confessed in a choked whisper, "Mother, I was blind. I placed my trust in Rebecca and nearly allowed you to forfeit everything." I gently stroked his head as I had done when he was a child, and replied, "Son, what matters is that you are here. That is all the solace I require." Yet within my heart a scar had formed, not solely from Rebecca's betrayal, but from my own acquiescence to being led to the precipice of life and death without questioning. I returned to my modest dwelling, where Joe remained motionless in his wheelchair. I sat beside him and recounted the entire sequence of events, from Mario's recording to Rebecca's apprehension. Whether he grasped every detail was uncertain, but as I concluded, I observed him blink, and 2 tears traced paths down his emaciated cheeks. I clasped his hand, squeezing it gently, and for the first time in years I felt a faint response, a weak pressure as if he were conveying a sense of understanding. I dissolved into tears, not from pain, but from the profound realization that, despite all that had transpired, he remained. My family, in its altered form, still remained. Mario emerged as the diminutive hero of our neighborhood. The day he returned home, he rushed to me, embraced me tightly, and whispered, "Grandma, I apologize for my delay in speaking out, but at least I arrived in time to save you." I laughed through my tears, holding the boy close, feeling the warmth emanating from his small frame. "You are the bravest individual I know," I declared, ruffling his hair. Mario offered a smile, the first genuine expression of joy I had witnessed in days. I looked into his eyes and saw that his innocence, though tinged by his recent experiences, remained intact. I resolved to protect Mario, to ensure he experienced a childhood unmarred by the darkness that had so recently enveloped us. On the final evening, I sat in my small room, illuminated by the flickering glow of an oil lamp. I opened my cherished diary and penned the concluding lines. Blood does not inherently forge familial bonds. It is often truth that reveals those truly deserving of such a designation. I had experienced considerable loss, but in its wake, I had rediscovered myself. I closed the diary, set down my pen, and listened to the rain drumming against the roof of the backyard shed. A strange sense of tranquility settled upon me, as if the tempest had finally subsided, revealing a clear sky. I gazed out the window, observing the pale moonlight bathing the backyard, and I knew with unwavering certainty that regardless of the arduous journey ahead, I would never again permit myself to be willfully blinded. I had reclaimed my inner strength, a treasure no one could ever seize. The narrative you have just encountered has undergone alterations in names and locations to preserve the privacy of those involved. Our intention is not to cast judgment, but rather to offer a reflection in the hope that it resonates with someone and prompts contemplation. How many mothers endure their suffering in silence within the confines of their own homes? I genuinely ponder what your course of action would be in my position. Would you choose silence to maintain domestic harmony, or would you dare to confront everything to reclaim your voice? I earnestly seek your perspective, as each story serves as a beacon, capable of illuminating the path for another. May divine blessings be bestowed, and I firmly believe that courage is the harbinger of brighter days. Meanwhile, on the concluding screen, I present two of the channel's most cherished narratives. I am confident they will captivate you.